Imagine waking up tomorrow morning and discovering that every decision you've made in the past 5 years, every purchase, every relationship choice, every career move, every moment of happiness or despair wasn't actually yours. Imagine realizing that an invisible puppet master has been pulling your strings so expertly that you never even felt the threads. You reach for your phone before your feet hit the floor. Your thumb finds that familiar blue icon before your mind fully awakens. 30 minutes dissolve into nothing as you consume carefully curated fragments of other people's lives, each one designed to trigger a specific neurochemical response in your brain. You feel connected, yet profoundly alone. Informed, yet somehow more confused than before. Entertained, yet strangely empty. This isn't about your phone. This isn't about social media. This is about something far more insidious, something that has rewired the very architecture of human desire itself. What if I told you that you're addicted to something you can't see, can't touch, and probably can't even name? What if this addiction is so perfectly camouflaged that it masquerades as progress, connection, and even personal growth? What if the very thing you believe is expanding your world is actually shrinking it to the size of a prison cell, and you're both the prisoner and the guard? You see, there's a drug more potent than cocaine, more addictive than heroin, and more accessible than alcohol. It doesn't require a dealer, a prescription, or even money. It's freely distributed by billion-dollar corporations, endorsed by governments, and celebrated by society. Yet it's destroying your capacity for deep thought, genuine relationships, and authentic experience at a rate that would make any traditional drug look like child's play. This drug is novelty, the endless artificial stimulation of new information, new sensations, new distractions, and you're not just using it, you're drowning in it. But here's where it gets truly disturbing. Your brain can't tell the difference between real novelty and manufactured novelty. To your dopamine receptors, the notification ping announcing another meaningless update carries the same neurochemical signature as discovering fire once carried for your ancestors. Your reward system, evolved over millions of years to help humans survive and thrive, has been hijacked by algorithms designed to maximize engagement, not human flourishing. Every refresh, every swipe, every click delivers a microscopic hit of that ancient reward chemical. But unlike the substantial dopamine release our ancestors received from genuine accomplishments, finding food, creating tools, forming bonds, these modern hits are perfectly calibrated to be satisfying enough to want more, but never satisfying. Enough to feel fulfilled. You're chasing digital ghosts through an infinite maze, and the walls keep shifting just as you think you've found the exit. The most terrifying part? You probably don't even realize you're addicted. This isn't the dramatic, visible addiction of movies and interventions. This is the silent addiction, the one that disguises itself as productivity, social connection, and staying informed. It's the addiction that makes you feel like you're living life to the fullest, while systematically destroying your ability to experience life at all. Consider this. When was the last time you sat in complete silence for 10 minutes without reaching for a device? When did you last have a conversation without checking your phone? When did you last read a book from cover to cover without interruption? When did you last experience boredom, real, uncomfortable, generative boredom, without immediately seeking stimulation? If these questions make you uncomfortable, if they reveal gaps in your experience that you hadn't noticed before, then you're beginning to see the outline of your invisible prison. But why should you care? Why does this matter when everyone else seems to be living the same way? Because while you've been consuming infinite streams of manufactured novelty, your capacity for sustained attention has been eroding. Your ability to form deep relationships has been fragmenting. Your potential for creative thought has been suffocating under an avalanche of other people's ideas. You're becoming a stranger to your own mind. The question isn't whether you're addicted to novelty. The question is how deeply this addiction has rewired your brain, and whether there's still time to reclaim what you've lost. The question is whether you have the courage to face the uncomfortable truth about what this silent addiction has stolen from you, and what it's still stealing every single day. Because once you see the strings, you can never unsee them. And what you do with that knowledge will determine whether you remain a puppet in someone else's show or become the author of your own story once again. To understand how we became slaves to artificial stimulation, we must first understand what Carl Jung called the tyranny of the immediate. Jung observed that modern humans have lost touch with what he termed the transcendent function, our ability to hold tension between opposing forces long enough for genuine insight to emerge. We've traded the uncomfortable richness of psychological depth for the comfortable shallowness of constant distraction. But this isn't merely a modern problem. Friedrich Nietzsche predicted this crisis over a century ago when he wrote about the last man, a being who seeks only comfort and entertainment, who has lost the capacity for genuine struggle and therefore genuine growth. Nietzsche saw that when life becomes too easy, when every discomfort can be immediately soothed, humans begin to atrophy spiritually. We become, in his words, human, all too human, creatures driven by base impulses rather than higher aspirations. The novelty addiction isn't just about technology. It's about something much deeper. It's about the fundamental human inability to sit with uncertainty, to tolerate discomfort, to exist without constant external validation. Arthur Schopenhauer understood this when he described the human condition as oscillating between the twin poles of want and boredom. We want something desperately until we get it, then immediately become bored and want something else. The digital age hasn't created this pattern. It has simply accelerated it beyond human comprehension. Your smartphone isn't the cause of your addiction. It's merely the most sophisticated delivery system ever created for an ancient human weakness. The real addiction is to what Viktor Frankl called existential avoidance, the desperate flight from the fundamental questions of meaning and purpose that define authentic human existence. Think about it. Every time you reflexively reach for stimulation, you're essentially saying, "I cannot bear to be alone with my own thoughts." Every swipe, every scroll, every click is a vote against your own inner life. You're choosing the artificial over the authentic, the immediate over the eternal, the easy over the meaningful. But here's where it gets psychologically devastating. This addiction doesn't just distract you from your problems, it systematically destroys your capacity to solve them. Jean-Paul Sartre wrote about bad faith, the human tendency to deny our fundamental freedom and responsibility by pretending we have no choice. The novelty addiction is bad faith in its purest form. It creates the illusion that you're actively engaging with life while actually teaching you to be passive, reactive, and dependent on external stimulation for any sense of vitality. The neurological reality is even more disturbing. Dr. Anna Lemke's research on dopamine reveals that our brains maintain homeostasis through a process called opponent tolerance. Every artificial high is automatically followed by a corresponding low. The more you stimulate your reward pathways with easy hits of novelty, the more your brain adjusts by reducing baseline dopamine production. You're literally rewiring yourself to be less capable of experiencing natural pleasure, satisfaction, and contentment. This creates what Aldous Huxley prophetically described in Brave New World, a population pacified not by force, but by pleasure. You become addicted to your own enslavement, defending the very system that's destroying your humanity. The soma Huxley imagined wasn't a drug. It was a way of living that makes real living impossible. But the psychological damage goes deeper. Still, when you're constantly consuming fragments of information, your mind loses its capacity for what philosopher William James called sustained attention, the ability to hold a single thought or problem in consciousness long enough for deep understanding to emerge. Without sustained attention, you cannot develop wisdom. You can accumulate information, but you cannot transform it into insight. This is why you can spend hours learning about self-improvement online, yet feel no more improved than when you started. Information without contemplation is like seeds scattered on concrete. It cannot take root. The novelty addiction doesn't just distract you from growth. It makes growth neurologically impossible by destroying the very cognitive architecture. That growth requires, Carl Jung warned, that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. The novelty addiction exists primarily to help you avoid this terrifying self-acceptance. Every external stimulus you consume is essentially a way of avoiding the internal work that authentic growth requires. You're outsourcing your inner life to algorithms designed by people who have never met you and don't care about your well-being. The philosophical implications are staggering. If Descartes was right that "I think, therefore I am," what happens when you can no longer think? When your thoughts are constantly interrupted, fragmented, and redirected by external forces? When your attention becomes a commodity sold to the highest bidder? You don't just lose your ability to think deeply. You begin to lose your sense of self entirely. You become what the sociologist David Reisman called other-directed, a person whose values, goals, and even sense of identity are shaped primarily by external influences rather than internal compass. This is the hidden problem. The novelty addiction isn't just making you less productive or less focused. It's making you less you. It's systematically dismantling the psychological foundations that authentic selfhood requires. And the most insidious part is that it feels like connection, growth, and engagement, while actually being the opposite of all three. The question now becomes, what are the full consequences of this systematic dismantling of human consciousness? What happens to a species that loses its capacity for deep thought, authentic relationship, and genuine solitude? The consequences of novelty addiction don't announce themselves with dramatic headlines or medical diagnoses. They seep into your life like carbon monoxide, colorless, odorless, and deadly. You don't notice them until the damage is already profound. And by then, you've often forgotten what normal was supposed to feel like. Consider your relationships. When was the last time you had a conversation that changed you, not informed you, not entertained you, but actually altered something fundamental about how you see yourself or the world? Most people can't remember because genuine intimacy requires sustained attention, the exact cognitive capacity that novelty addiction systematically destroys. You've learned to communicate in fragments, in reactions, in the emotional equivalent of fast food. Your relationships have become a series of quick exchanges rather than deep communion. You share your location, but not your inner world. You react to what others say, but rarely truly listen. You're physically present, but psychologically absent, skimming across the surface of human connection like a stone across water. This creates what psychologists call lonely together syndrome, the phenomenon of being surrounded by people yet feeling profoundly isolated. You're connected to hundreds or thousands of people online, but intimate with none. You have access to more human stories than any generation in history, yet you're losing touch with your own story, the neurological. Research reveals why this is happening. Dr. Clifford Nass at Stanford discovered that people who regularly multitask, switching between digital inputs, actually lose the ability to filter irrelevant information. Your brain begins to treat everything as equally important, which means nothing feels truly important. You develop what attention researcher Adam Gazzaley calls continuous partial attention, a state where you're always somewhat engaged but never fully present. This partial attention doesn't just affect your relationships, it transforms your entire relationship with reality. You begin to experience life the way you experience social media, as a stream of disconnected moments rather than a coherent narrative. Your memories become fragmented because your attention was fragmented when those memories were formed. You lose the ability to construct meaning from experience because meaning requires the kind of sustained reflection that your scattered attention can no longer provide. The economic consequences are equally devastating, though rarely discussed. Novelty addiction turns you into what marketing experts call a perfect consumer. Someone with unlimited wants but no clear needs. Someone who buys impulsively but never feels satisfied. You're constantly exposed to lifestyle envy through curated content, creating artificial desires for things you never wanted until someone showed you that you should want them. Your financial decisions become reactive rather than strategic. You buy things to fill the emotional void that constant stimulation creates, but buying things only deepens that void. You're trapped in what philosopher Byung-Chul Han calls the burnout society. working harder to afford things you don't need to impress people you don't know while missing the experiences that would actually fulfill you. But perhaps the most tragic consequence is what happens to your creativity. Genuine creativity requires what psychologist Jerome Singer called positive, constructive daydreaming, the mental state where your mind wanders freely enough to make unexpected connections. This is the neurological foundation of insight, innovation, and artistic expression. Novelty addiction makes this impossible. Your brain never gets quiet enough for those unexpected connections to emerge. Instead of generating original thoughts, you become a curator of other people's thoughts. Instead of creating, you consume. Instead of expressing your unique perspective, you react to whatever perspective the algorithm serves you. This is why you might spend hours watching videos about productivity, yet feel less productive than ever. You're consuming information about creativity instead of actually creating. You're learning about mindfulness instead of practicing it. You're watching other people live authentic lives instead of building your own. The cultural consequences extend even further. When an entire generation loses the capacity for sustained attention, democracy itself becomes impossible. Democratic participation requires citizens capable of grappling with complex issues, weighing competing values, and making thoughtful decisions about collective welfare. But novelty addiction creates what Neil Postman predicted: a population amusing ourselves to death, politically engaged in style, but intellectually passive in substance. You become susceptible to what Hannah Arendt called the banality of evil, not because you're malicious, but because you're not paying attention. Complex moral issues get reduced to viral soundbites. Nuanced problems get simplified into binary choices. Your political opinions become as fragmented and reactive as everything else in your life. Even your relationship with time itself becomes distorted. Novelty addiction creates what chronobiologists call time poverty, the feeling that you never have enough time despite having more leisure time than any generation in human history. This happens because constant stimulation makes time feel scarce even when it's abundant. You're always rushing toward the next piece of content, the next notification, the next hit of novelty. You lose the ability to be bored, which means you lose access to the psychological state where your deepest insights emerge. You lose the capacity for what Romans called otium, leisurely time spent in contemplation. You become temporarily homeless, always rushing toward a future that never arrives because each moment is immediately consumed by the next distraction. The most insidious consequence of all is that novelty addiction makes you complicit in your own diminishment. You begin to defend the very system that's destroying you. You rationalize constant connectivity as staying informed. You justify endless scrolling as social engagement. You mistake consuming content about growth for actually growing. You become what the psychiatrist R.D. Laing called ontologically insecure, uncertain about your own existence because you've lost touch with your authentic thoughts, feelings, and desires. You know what you're supposed to want, what you're supposed to think, what you're supposed to feel, but you've forgotten what you actually want, think, and feel. This is the invisible consequence that underlies all the others. You're disappearing from your own life. But here's what the tech companies don't want you to know: this process is reversible. The path to freedom begins with a radical realization. You are not broken. You are not weak-willed. You are not addicted because you lack character or discipline. You are responding exactly as any human would respond when their ancient reward systems are hijacked by technology designed by teams of neuroscientists, behavioral economists, and addiction specialists whose job is to capture and monetize your attention. The first step in any rebellion is recognizing the enemy. Your enemy is not technology itself, but the weaponization of technology against your own cognitive architecture. Your enemy is not social media companies, but the attention economy that turns human consciousness into a commodity. Your enemy is not your phone, but your learned helplessness in the face of artificial stimulation. This rebellion requires what Alcoholics Anonymous calls radical acceptance, accepting that you cannot moderate your consumption of addictive stimulation any more than an alcoholic can moderate their drinking. The technology is specifically designed to overcome your willpower. Trying to use willpower alone is like trying to stop a freight train with your bare hands. Instead, you must engineer what behavioral psychologist B.J. Fogg calls environmental design. Make novelty harder to access than boredom. Create friction between impulse and action. Design your environment so that the default behavior is the behavior you want to cultivate. Start with what digital minimalist Cal Newport calls digital decluttering, a complete elimination of non-essential technologies for 30 days. Not reduction, elimination. Delete the apps, log out of the accounts. Make accessing stimulation so inconvenient that you'd have to be intentional about it. This will be profoundly uncomfortable. You'll experience what researchers call digital withdrawal, anxiety, restlessness, phantom notification syndrome, and an almost physical craving for stimulation. This discomfort is not a sign that something is wrong. It's evidence that something is finally going right. You're feeling the neurons that have been artificially stimulated beginning to return to their natural state. During this digital detox, you must simultaneously cultivate what philosopher Simone Weil called attention, not the scattered, reactive attention that technology trains, but deep, purposeful, sustained attention. Begin with meditation, but not the commodified app-based meditation that turns even contemplation into consumption. Practice what the contemplatives called sitting in the void, spending time in complete stillness without any external input whatsoever. Start with 5 minutes. Sit in silence without any devices, any books, any music, any stimulation of any kind. Simply exist with your own thoughts. This will be almost unbearable at first because you've forgotten how to be alone with yourself. Your mind will generate an endless stream of reasons why this is unnecessary, why you should do something productive instead. Ignore those thoughts. They are not your thoughts. They are the thoughts that the attention economy has programmed into you. Your authentic thoughts emerge only after you've sat through the programmed ones. As you develop tolerance for solitude, begin what Julia Cameron calls morning pages. 3 pages of longhand writing first thing each morning before any digital input. Don't write anything profound or useful, just write whatever emerges from your mind onto paper. This practice rebuilds the neural pathways that connect inner experience to conscious expression. Next, reclaim your relationship with information. Instead of consuming random content, choose 3 specific topics that genuinely matter to you, and go deep. Read books, actual books, not articles or summaries. Follow threads of inquiry for months or years rather than days or hours. Become what author Ryan Holiday calls a student of life, rather than a consumer of content. This is where the rebellion becomes revolutionary. You must learn to value depth over breadth, quality over quantity, signal over noise. In a culture that profits from your distraction, sustained attention becomes a radical act. In an economy that depends on your impulsiveness, thoughtful consideration becomes subversive. Reclaim your social connections by practicing what psychologist Sherry Turkle calls conversation. Sustained, undivided attention to another human being. When you're with someone, be completely with them. Put away all devices, look them in the eyes, listen not just to respond but to understand. Let silence exist between you without rushing to fill it. You'll discover that most people have forgotten how to have real conversations because they've been trained to communicate in fragments. Don't judge them. Help them remember. Model the kind of presence you want to experience. Redesign your relationship with time itself. Instead of measuring productivity by how much you accomplish, measure it by how present you are while accomplishing it. Quality of attention matters more than quantity of activity. 1 hour of sustained focus produces more value than 8 hours of distracted multitasking. Practice what the Stoics called negative visualization, imagining loss to appreciate what you have. Spend time considering what your life would look like if you never broke free from digital addiction. Use that future as motivation to change your present. Most importantly, understand that this rebellion is not about returning to some romanticized past. It's about reclaiming human capacities that have been temporarily hijacked by profit-driven technology. You're not becoming a Luddite. You're becoming more fully human. The tech companies will tell you that disconnection means missing out. They're right. You'll miss out on anxiety, superficial relationships, scattered attention, and the gradual erosion of your authentic self. You'll miss out on being a product in someone else's business model. What you'll gain is infinitely more valuable. You'll gain yourself back. Here is the truth that will change everything. The novelty addiction was never about the novelty itself. It was about avoiding the one thing that every human being must eventually face: the profound responsibility of creating meaning in an inherently meaningless universe. This is what existentialist philosophers understood that modern psychology has forgotten. The anxiety you feel when you put down your phone, the restlessness that drives you to constantly seek stimulation, the emptiness that yawns open when you're truly alone with your thoughts. This isn't pathology. This is the human condition. This is what Søren Kierkegaard called the dizziness of freedom. The overwhelming realization that you are entirely responsible for creating the meaning of your own existence. Every notification you chase, every scroll you indulge, every click you make is ultimately an attempt to escape this fundamental anxiety. You're not addicted to technology. You're addicted to avoiding the terrifying truth that your life has whatever meaning you choose to give it, no more, no less. Viktor Frankl discovered this truth in the Nazi concentration camps. Stripped of everything external, possessions, status, comfort, even basic human dignity, he realized that the one thing no external force could take away was his freedom to choose his response to his circumstances. In the face of ultimate suffering, he found ultimate freedom. He wrote, "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. The novelty addiction is your unconscious attempt to avoid this responsibility. As long as you're constantly reacting to external stimuli, you never have to face the question of what you would choose if you were truly free to choose. As long as your attention is always directed outward, you never have to confront the vast creative potential that lies within you." But here's the revolutionary insight. The moment you stop running from this responsibility, it transforms from a burden into the greatest gift you've ever received. You're not a victim of circumstance, not a product of your conditioning, not a puppet dancing to algorithmic strings. You are a creative force capable of authoring your own existence. This realization is what Nietzsche meant when he wrote about becoming who you are. Not who society tells you to be, not who your algorithms suggest you should be, but who you actually are beneath all the external programming. This is what Carl Jung called individuation, the process of becoming a complete, autonomous individual rather than a collection of social roles and reactive patterns. The novelty addiction has been preventing this individuation by keeping you in a perpetual state of what Jung called participation mystique, unconscious identification with external forces. You think you're staying connected to the world, but you're actually disconnected from yourself. You think you're learning and growing, but you're actually remaining in a state of psychological adolescence. True adulthood, psychological maturity, requires what the existentialists called authenticity, the courage to live according to your own values rather than borrowed values, to pursue your own questions rather than prescribed answers, to create your own meaning rather than consume manufactured meaning. This is why breaking free from novelty addiction is so much more than a productivity hack or a wellness strategy. It's the first step toward what Abraham Maslow called self-actualization, becoming the fullest expression of your unique human potential. It's the beginning of what the ancient Greeks called eudaimonia, not happiness in the sense of pleasure, but the deep satisfaction that comes from living in accordance with your highest nature. When you stop constantly consuming other people's thoughts, your own thoughts finally have space to emerge. When you stop constantly reacting to external stimuli, your own creative impulses can finally express themselves. When you stop running from solitude, you discover that solitude is where all the most important conversations take place, the conversations between who you are and who you're becoming. This is the final truth. The novelty addiction isn't just destroying your productivity, your relationships, or your mental health. It's preventing you from discovering what you came here to create, what you came here to contribute, what you came here to become. Every human being has what Martha Graham called a vital force, a life energy, a quickening that is translated through you into action. This force is unique to you, no one else can express it, and it cannot be expressed without you. But it can only emerge in the space between stimuli, in the silence between thoughts, in the pause between reactions. The addiction to artificial novelty has been filling that sacred space with noise. Breaking free isn't about depriving yourself of stimulation. It's about creating space for the most important stimulation of all, the emergence of your authentic self. You are not here to be entertained. You are not here to be informed. You are not here to be connected to everyone else's experience. You are here to live your own experience so fully and authentically that it becomes a gift to the world. The moment you truly understand this, the novelty addiction loses its power over you, not because you've developed willpower, but because you've discovered something infinitely more interesting than any external stimulation, the inexhaustible mystery of your own becoming. This is the rebellion that changes everything. Not fighting against technology, but fighting for your right to exist as a creative force in the universe rather than a consumer of someone else's creativity. The choice is yours. It has always been yours. The only question is, what will you create with the attention you've reclaimed